Welcome to Across the Pitch. Let's get into it. The Champions League group stage has wrapped up, and what a wild ride it's been with this new format. Let me break down exactly what happened and what it means going forward, because trust me, there are some absolutely massive implications here. First, let's talk about who made it through automatically. Liverpool topped the entire league phase with 21 points, followed by Barcelona, Arsenal, and Inter Milan all on 19 points. Atletico Madrid, Bayer Leverkusen, Lille, and, perhaps most surprisingly, Aston Villa round out our top 8 who get automatic qualification to the round of 16. That's huge for these clubs, especially Villa in their first Champions League campaign in decades. But here's where it gets really interesting. Real Madrid and Manchester City, yes, you heard that right, both failed to qualify automatically. Madrid finished 11th and City came in 22nd, meaning they'll have to go through playoff rounds. And the way the bracket works, we could potentially see Madrid versus City in those playoffs. Just let that sink in for a moment. One of those giants could be out before the round of 16 even begins. The drama on the final match day was incredible. City were actually losing to Club Brugge at halftime and staring elimination in the face before turning it around with 3 second-half goals. Even then, they needed other results to go their way to secure that playoff spot. Real Madrid won their game against Brest, but it wasn't enough to climb into the top 8. We saw some incredible individual performances too. Morgan Rogers absolutely lit it up for Villa with a hat-trick in their 4-2 win over Celtic. That victory sealed their automatic qualification spot. Imagine saying that at the start of the season. Over in Paris, Dembele also bagged 3 goals as PSG beat Stuttgart 4-1, though they'll still need to navigate the playoffs. Arsenal's Ethan Nwaneri continued his breakthrough season with another goal in their 2-1 win at Girona. At just 17 years old, he's becoming impossible to ignore and might have played himself into contention for their massive weekend clash with Manchester City. Speaking of Arsenal, they've now won 4 Champions League games in a row for the first time since reaching the final back in 2006. That's the kind of stat that should have their fans dreaming. The new format has definitely delivered in terms of excitement. Having 36 teams in one league table with every game potentially affecting multiple clubs' chances of progression, it's created so many interesting narratives and crucial matches. Teams like Villa and Lille making the top 8 while traditional powerhouses like Madrid and City have to go through playoffs shows how unpredictable and competitive it's been. Looking ahead to the knockout stages, the bracket setup is fascinating. If PSG makes it through their playoff, they could potentially face Liverpool or Barcelona in the round of 16. Meanwhile, whoever survives from that Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, and Manchester City playoff group will have to deal with either Atletico Madrid or Bayer Leverkusen. These are the kind of high-stakes matches we usually don't see until much later in the competition. Let's dive deeper into some of the individual matches and what they tell us about these teams moving forward. Let's start with Manchester City, because their situation is particularly fascinating. They went down 1-0 to Club Brugge at the Etihad, and you could feel the tension in the stadium. This wasn't just any group stage game. City were genuinely at risk of missing out on the Champions League entirely. No Europa League safety net in this new format. Guardiola made a crucial change bringing on Savinho, and suddenly City looked like a different team. But here's the thing. They're still showing these defensive vulnerabilities that we've seen all season. Brugge were getting in behind them constantly on the counter, and better teams will punish that. Speaking of better teams, let's talk about what happened with Arsenal. They went to Girona and got the job done with a 2-1 win, but what really caught everyone's eye is Ethan Nwaneri. This kid is something special. The way he took his goal, cutting inside, creating that yard of space, and finding the bottom corner, it was eerily reminiscent of Saka. And that's the fascinating thing about Arsenal right now. They've got these academy graduates like Nwaneri and Lewis Skelly who are genuinely pushing for starting spots. It's no longer just about giving young players minutes. They're actually among Arsenal's best options. Aston Villa's story is incredible. They've gone from not even being in European competition last season to finishing in the top 8 of the Champions League. Morgan Rogers put on an absolute show against Celtic with his hat trick. His movement for the first goal, the technique for his second, and then being in the right place at the right time for his third. This is a player who's really coming into his own. But Villa now have an interesting situation on their hands with the John Duran to Saudi Arabia rumors and Arsenal's bid for Ollie Watkins. They're in a great position in the Champions League, but could their squad be weakened in January? Liverpool topped the overall table despite rotating heavily in their final game. That's the luxury their early qualification afforded them. But what's really interesting is how the bracket could play out for them. They're potentially looking at facing either PSG, Benfica, Monaco, or Brest in the round of 16 if those teams make it through the playoffs. PSG would obviously be the toughest draw there, but they haven't exactly looked convincing in this campaign either. One team that has looked convincing is Inter Milan. Lautaro Martinez's hat trick against Monaco was a statement performance. They've only conceded 1 goal in their 8 Champions League games so far. That's absolutely remarkable. They're not getting as much attention as some other teams, but they could be real dark horses in the knockout stages. Let's also acknowledge how this new format has changed the dynamics of the competition. In the past, teams like Real Madrid might have been able to coast through a group knowing they just needed to finish in the top 2. But this league phase has required consistency across all 8 games. One bad run, like Madrid's 3 consecutive defeats to Milan, Liverpool, and Lille, can completely derail your campaign. Let's talk about the knockout stage structure, because this is where things get really interesting. The way UEFA has set up these brackets creates some fascinating potential matchups, but also means some teams have a much tougher route to the final than others. Looking at the top side of the bracket, Liverpool and Barcelona are in a strong position. The teams they could potentially face in the round of 16, Sporting, Club Brugge, Atalanta, or Dortmund, are all beatable opponents for clubs of their caliber. Then you've got Lille or Aston Villa waiting in the quarters. Don't get me wrong, Villa have been incredible this season, and Lille are no pushovers. But if you're Liverpool or Barcelona, you've got to feel good about that path to the semifinals. Now contrast that with what's happening in the other side of the bracket. You've got this absolute gauntlet of Real Madrid, Manchester City, and Bayern Munich all potentially knocking each other out in the playoffs. Whoever survives that will face either Atletico Madrid or Bayer Leverkusen. That's brutal. And then in the other quarter, you've got Arsenal or Inter potentially waiting. The difference in difficulty between these 2 paths to the final is stark. Speaking of Arsenal, they've put themselves in a great position by finishing 3rd overall. Not only do they avoid those playoff games, but they're looking at potentially facing Fiorentina, Juventus, AC Milan, or PSV in the round of 16. All tough teams, sure, but it could have been so much worse. Arsenal fans have to be pleased with that, especially given it's their first Champions League campaign in years. The transfer implications of all this are fascinating too. Arsenal putting in that £60 million bid for Ollie Watkins shows they're serious about strengthening, but the timing is tricky. Villa are flying high in the Champions League. Why would they want to sell? But then you've got this John Duran situation with Saudi Arabia reportedly offering massive money. These Champions League positions are affecting the transfer market in real time. Manchester City's situation is particularly interesting as well. They've got this massive game against Arsenal at the weekend, and now they're looking at potentially facing Real Madrid or Bayern Munich in a Champions League playoff shortly after. Guardiola's got some big decisions to make about how to manage his squad through this period. The addition of Marmoush could be crucial. He wasn't registered for the league phase, but will be available for the playoffs. Let's talk about some of these younger players who've really announced themselves in this Champions League campaign. Ethan Nwaneri for Arsenal has been a revelation. Morgan Rogers is looking like a star in the making for Villa. But what's really striking is how these teams are trusting young players in big moments. It's not just about giving them minutes anymore. They're becoming key players. Look at how Arsenal are using Nwaneri when Saka's out, or how Rodgers has become central to Villa's attack. The defensive records are telling an interesting story, too. Inter Milan have been absolutely rock solid, conceding just once in 8 games. Meanwhile, City and Madrid, traditionally very strong defensively, have looked vulnerable. City in particular seem to be really missing that Rodri-type figure who can stop counterattacks. The games are more open, more attacking, and it's leading to some incredible football. Real Madrid finishing 11th is shocking when you really think about it. This is the team with more European Cups than anyone else, yet they're having to go through playoffs. But when you look at the performances, especially that run where they lost to Milan, Liverpool, and Lille consecutively, you can see the issues. They're still heavily reliant on Bellingham for creativity. And while Rodrigo has stepped up with some crucial goals, they're missing that defensive stability they had last season. The positive for Madrid is that Vinicius Jr. is coming back. His return could be perfectly timed for these playoff games. And let's be honest, if any team knows how to navigate knockout football in the Champions League, it's Real Madrid. But they'll likely have to get past either Manchester City or Bayern Munich just to reach the round of 16. That's a massive ask, even for them. Speaking of Manchester City, they're in a similar position, but for different reasons. Their defensive vulnerabilities have been exposed repeatedly. Even in their 3-1 win over Club Brugge, they were getting caught on the counter constantly. Guardiola seems to be really missing that Rodri-type figure who can stop transitions, and teams are exploiting the space behind their fullbacks. The addition of Marmoush could be crucial. He gives them that pace and directness they've sometimes lacked. Let's talk about Liverpool because they've been the standout team of the league phase. 21 points from 8 games, and they did it while rotating heavily in some matches. What's really impressive is how their squad depth has developed. Players like Kwanzaa and McConnell have stepped up when called upon. The only slight concern might be that Van Dijk contract situation. Letting him leave would be a massive risk given how crucial he is to their defensive organization. Arsenal deserve huge credit for finishing third in their first Champions League campaign in years. The way they've integrated young players like Nwaneri and Lewis Skelly while maintaining their level is impressive. That said, they still look like they need a striker. The £60 million bid for Watkins shows they recognize this, but they might need to look at alternatives. The good news is they've got time to sort this before the knockout stages begin. Aston Villa have been the surprise package of the tournament. Not only have they qualified automatically for the round of 16, but they've done it playing some brilliant football. Morgan Rogers has been a revelation. That hat trick against Celtic showed all his qualities. The big question for Villa now is how they handle this Duran situation. If he goes to Saudi Arabia, they'll have money to spend, but finding the right replacement mid-season won't be easy. Inter Milan are flying under the radar, but their defensive record is remarkable. 1 goal conceded in 8 games tells its own story. Lautaro Martinez is in incredible form, and their system under Inzaghi looks perfectly suited to knockout football. They could be real dark horses in this competition. Bayern Munich are in an interesting position. They're in the playoffs, but they've shown enough quality to suggest they could still go far. The issue is they might have to face Real Madrid or Manchester City just to reach the round of 16. Kane has settled in brilliantly, but they've looked vulnerable defensively at times. Look at PSG, because their transformation this season has been remarkable. Without Mbappe, they've actually become more cohesive as a team. Dembele's hat trick against Stuttgart showed what they're capable of. It's not just about individual brilliance anymore. There's a real system in place. The way they've beaten Manchester City and put together 3 wins in a row shows they're hitting form at the right time. Barcelona have put together a very strong campaign as well. Finishing second overall is impressive, and they've done it while blooding young talent. The way Hansi Flick has them playing is interesting. They're not quite the possession-heavy team of old, but they're extremely effective in transition. The draw has been kind to them too. They could have a relatively straightforward path to the semifinals. Atletico Madrid making the top 8 automatically is significant. They've evolved under Simeone this season. They're not just about defensive solidity anymore. They've actually been conceding more than usual, but they're much more threatening going forward. That said, they've still shipped 12 goals in the Champions League, which might be a concern heading into the knockout stages. Bayer Leverkusen have been one of the stories of the season. The job Xabi Alonso is doing there is remarkable. Their pressing game has caused problems for everyone they've faced. Their direct qualification for the round of 16 shows this isn't just about domestic form. Lille deserve huge credit for making the top 8. That 6-1 win over Feyenoord on the final day was a statement. Jonathan David continues to be their talisman, but it's their collective organization that's really impressed. They've shown they can compete with anyone on their day. Atalanta are fascinating because they've maintained their high-intensity style even in the Champions League. They gave Barcelona real problems in that 2-2 draw, and they've shown enough to suggest they could cause problems in the playoffs. Gasperini has them playing without fear, regardless of the opposition. Benfica's late surge to secure a playoff spot was impressive. They've got that big game experience from their run last season, and that win at Juventus showed they can perform when the pressure's on. If they get through the playoffs, they could be a dangerous opponent for anyone. Celtic have had their moments despite not making the top 8. That game against Villa showed both their qualities and limitations. They can score goals against anyone, but they're vulnerable defensively at this level. Still, they've shown enough to suggest they could cause problems in the playoffs. PSV have been interesting to watch. They actually beat Liverpool in their final game, albeit against a heavily rotated side. Their high-pressing style can cause problems for any team, and they've got the attacking talent to hurt teams if they get through the playoffs. Monaco's inconsistency has been their biggest issue. They've shown flashes of brilliance, but also periods of vulnerability. The quality is there, particularly in attack, but they'll need to find more consistency if they want to make an impact in the playoffs. Club Brugge showed real quality despite their final position. They actually had Manchester City seriously worried at the Etihad, going ahead and creating multiple chances on the counter. Their pressing game is excellent, and they've got pace in transition that can trouble any team. The question is whether they can maintain that intensity over 2 legs in the playoffs. Sporting have been something of an enigma in this campaign. They've had some brilliant moments, but also periods where they've looked vulnerable. Their system is interesting. They can switch between a back 3 and back 4 seamlessly during games, which could make them tricky opponents in knockout football. Losing Amorim has wrecked them, though, but good luck to them. Juventus's struggles have been telling. That home defeat to Benfica exposed a lot of their issues. They're caught between trying to play a more progressive style under Mata while still having personnel better suited to a more defensive approach. The injury to their center back, forcing Locatelli to drop into defense, symbolized their problems. AC Milan have shown flashes of their potential, but that defeat to Dinamo Zagreb was disappointing. They've got the talent, particularly in attack, but they haven't quite found the consistency at this level. Their high press can be devastating when it works, but they look vulnerable when teams play through it. Feyenoord have had a tough campaign, epitomized by that 6-1 defeat to Lille. Still, they've shown enough in patches to suggest they could be dangerous in the playoffs if they can find more consistency. Their home form in particular has been strong. Dinamo Zagreb pulled off that surprise win over Milan, but ultimately, it wasn't enough for them to progress further. They lose out on goal difference. They've shown they can compete at this level, particularly at home, but their away form has let them down. Stuttgart struggled against PSG, but they've had their moments in the competition. Their high-energy pressing style can cause problems, but they've found it harder to impose their game against the top teams. Still, the experience will be valuable for their development. The introduction of one large league table with 36 teams has completely transformed how teams approach the competition. In the old format, teams could sometimes coast through groups knowing they just needed to finish in the top 2. Now, every single point matters right until the end because your final position determines your entire knockout path. Look at how this has affected squad management. Liverpool, having secured their position early, could rotate heavily in their final game. Meanwhile, teams like Manchester City and Real Madrid had to go full strength until the very end. This creates a fascinating dynamic heading into domestic competitions. Some teams are fresher than others. The financial implications are massive too. Making the top 8 automatically not only means avoiding those playoff games, but it also means guaranteed revenue from 2 fewer matches. For clubs like Aston Villa, this automatic qualification is worth millions in additional revenue, which could significantly impact their January transfer plans. The scheduling impact is another interesting aspect. Teams who made the top 8 get a significant break while others play playoffs. This creates different rhythms for different teams. Some will have rest, others will have momentum from competitive games. It's hard to say which is more advantageous. The way the playoff system works is creating some fascinating tactical considerations too. Teams need to approach these games differently than traditional knockout ties because away goals don't count. This might lead to more attacking football, as we're already seeing with the increased goal tallies across the competition. The pathway for smaller clubs has completely changed too. In the old format, teams like Lille or Villa might have been drawn in a group of death and been effectively eliminated after 3 games. Now, they have 8 games to prove themselves against various opponents, making it more of a true meritocracy. The commercial aspect is fascinating. With teams playing different opponents each match day, rather than home and away against the same 3 teams, we're seeing new markets opened up. Clubs are reaching different audiences, creating new rivalries, and expanding their global footprint in ways the old format didn't allow. The impact on coaching strategies has been significant. Managers can no longer just prepare for 6 group games against 3 opponents. They need broader tactical flexibility to handle 8 different teams with varying styles. This has led to more dynamic approaches and tactical innovation. There's also been a shift in how teams approach home advantage. In the old format, home games were crucial in a 6-game group stage. Now, with 8 games against different opponents, we're seeing teams take more risks away from home because one bad result isn't as catastrophic. The data analytics side has completely changed too. Teams now need to scout and prepare for many more potential opponents. The old approach of deep diving into the 3 group opponents has been replaced by broader, more adaptable analysis systems. This is changing how clubs structure their recruitment and analysis departments. Training methods are evolving to cope with the new format. Teams need to maintain peak condition across more games, while also being ready for playoff matches that could come thick and fast. Recovery protocols and rotation strategies have had to adapt accordingly. The qualification pathway for future seasons has become more complex. Clubs need to plan their finances and squad building around potentially playing in playoffs rather than going straight through. This affects everything from contract negotiations to facility improvements, as teams need more robust infrastructure to handle different possible scenarios. The high-pressing game has taken on new dimensions. Teams like Liverpool and Bayer Leverkusen have shown you can maintain an aggressive press even with squad rotation, but it requires incredible tactical discipline. We're seeing more sophisticated pressing triggers and better coordinated movements across different personnel. The role of the goalkeeper has evolved significantly. It's not just about shot stopping or playing out from the back anymore. Take the contrast between Inter's defensive solidity and City's struggles. The goalkeeper's positioning during opposition transitions has become crucial. We saw this with Neto's mistake for Arsenal, coming way out of his box against Girona. Counterattacking has become more refined. It's not just about pace anymore. Teams like Villa and Lille have shown how to counterpress after losing the ball during their own counterattacks. This counter-counter approach is creating more transitional phases within single passages of play. The false 9 position has almost disappeared at the highest level. Teams are either going with traditional number 9s like Harry Kane at Bayern, or they're using extremely mobile forwards like Kylian Mbappé, who can drift wide but still provide a central presence. The days of the pure false 9 seem to be fading. The role of the striker has become more about movement patterns than traditional hold-up play. Look at how Ollie Watkins plays for Villa. He's constantly making decoy runs to create space for others rather than just trying to get on the end of moves himself. Set piece innovation has reached new levels. We're seeing more training ground routines than ever before, particularly on defensive set pieces, where teams are mixing zonal and man marking in increasingly complex ways. Morgan Rogers' first goal for Villa came from this kind of sophisticated set piece planning. The use of inverted fullbacks has evolved too. It's not just about tucking inside anymore. We're seeing fullbacks who can shift between inverted and traditional roles multiple times within the same game, depending on the phase of play. This tactical flexibility is becoming essential at the highest level. The use of wide attackers has evolved significantly. We're seeing less of the traditional get to the byline and cross approach. Instead, players like Rodrigo for Real Madrid are mastering the art of the cutback from wider positions. They're stopping, creating separation, and finding passing angles that break defensive lines. This change has made traditional crossing positions much more unpredictable for defenders. Midfield rotations have become more complex. Teams are no longer just swapping positions, they're creating deliberate overloads and underloads in specific zones. Look at how Bellingham moves for Madrid. He's not just roaming freely, he's deliberately leaving spaces for others to exploit while drawing defenders with him. The defensive line's starting position has become more varied. We're seeing teams shift their defensive line significantly based on opposition patterns rather than just the position of the ball. Inter Milan's remarkable defensive record comes partly from how they adjust their line based on the opponent's attacking structure, not just ball position. Transition marking has also evolved. Teams aren't just trying to stop counterattacks, they're setting traps during their own attacks to regain possession in dangerous areas. PSG under Luis Enrique have mastered this, positioning players to intercept likely clearance routes rather than just pressing the ball. There's been a shift in how teams defend corners. Rather than just marking zones or men, teams are now setting up to launch immediate counterattacks. This means leaving specific players upfield and having pre-planned passing routes to exploit the opposition's corner attack setup. The use of asymmetric formations has increased. Teams are no longer trying to maintain perfect shape. They're deliberately creating imbalances to exploit specific weaknesses. Bayern Munich under Tuchel often shift their entire formation towards one side to overload specific zones. The success of this new format has really changed the game. We've seen traditional powerhouses like Real Madrid and Manchester City having to fight for playoff spots, while teams like Aston Villa and Lille have secured automatic qualification. This isn't just about one surprising season. It's showing that the gap between Europe's elite and the chasing pack might be closing. Looking ahead to the knockout stages, we're set for some fascinating matchups. The potential for a Manchester City versus Real Madrid playoff is the kind of high-stakes game we usually don't see until much later in the competition. The fact that one of these giants won't even make the round of 16 shows how competitive European football has become. The new format has also changed how clubs need to approach squad building. It's no longer enough to have a strong first 11 and a few rotation options. The increased number of games, plus the potential for playoffs, means teams need quality throughout their squad. We've seen this with Liverpool using academy graduates like McConnell, Arsenal bringing through Nwaneri and Lewis Skelly, and Villa trusting young talents like Morgan Rogers. Looking at the favorites, Liverpool have to be considered serious contenders after topping the league phase. Their squad depth has been impressive, and they've got a relatively favorable path to the latter stages. Barcelona and Arsenal are well positioned too, but Inter Milan might be the dark horse. Their defensive record is remarkable, and they know how to navigate knockout football. The tactical evolution we've seen this season suggests we're entering a new era of European football. The high-pressing game has become more sophisticated. The role of forwards has changed dramatically, and we're seeing more complex positional play than ever before. Teams can no longer rely on one style of play. They need to be adaptable across different tactical approaches. What's particularly exciting is how this format has created more meaningful games. Every match matters because your final position determines your entire knockout path. This has led to more attacking football, more goals, and more drama, exactly what fans want to see. For the future of the sport, this season might be seen as a turning point. The success of teams like Villa and Lille shows that with good coaching, smart recruitment, and the right tactical approach, teams can compete at the highest level without needing decades of Champions League experience or billions in investment. The knockout stages promise to be fascinating. Will Liverpool continue their impressive form? Can Barcelona or Arsenal end their Champions League droughts? Will one of Real Madrid, Manchester City, or Bayern Munich fall at the playoff hurdle? Will Inter's defensive solidity carry them deep into the competition? These are the storylines that will define the rest of the season. One thing's for certain: this new format has made the Champions League more unpredictable and exciting than ever before. Whether you're a fan of a traditional powerhouse or a rising force, there's everything to play for. The road to the final is going to be full of twists and turns, and I can't wait to see how it all unfolds. Remember to like and subscribe for more Champions League analysis, and let me know in the comments who you think will lift the trophy this season. If you made it this far, I really appreciate you. Thanks for watching. This has been Across the Pitch, over and out.